Hey guys, it's John from the Visicast. So I've literally just received this in the post this morning and I am going to do a really quick review. It's going to be more based around the units than any of the fluff. So I am really excited about this codex. I used to collect Grey Knights. They were my second ever army and I played them for quite a long time. Unfortunately, over the years they have gone from being very effective to being quite bland and not really that great either. But with the this codex, I believe that they're coming back a little bit, so you're going to see a lot more Grey Knights on the channel, and we already have some battle reports booked in to film, so expect to see that in about 2 weeks' time. Starting out with the army-wide rules, these are exactly the same as they are in the index, so no changes here. And They Shall Know No Fear allows you to re-roll morale tests for your Marines, which is the same for most Marine armies. Demon Hunters allows you to re-roll attacks against demons in the fight phase, re-rolling wounds, against them. And Rites of Banishment is basically a change to Smite. So Grey Knights, obviously they can all cast Smite because they're all Psychers, and Smite doesn't have a limit as to how many times it can be cast. However, the range is nerfed, as is the wound value to only 1. However, if you go against demons, it automatically does 3. So in terms of fluff, as it were, these guys do suit what they should be doing in terms of being super effective against demons, because obviously that's what they're all about. And then Teleport Strike, which is essentially Deep Strike. In terms of their war gear as well, no real changes. We just have additions for Dreadnought heavy weapons and combi weapons in this section. Other than that, all exactly the same as in the index. Moving on to Lord Kaldor Drago, who is a badass and he looks like one. He is, again, exactly the same as he is in the index. I will go over points at the end of the video, but in terms of his stat lines and rules, he is identical. So no updates there. His main value, because he's quite expensive, becomes in the form of allowing you to re-roll to hits for Grey Knight units. So he has Chapter Master, which allows you to re-roll failed hit rolls for friendly Grey Knight units within 6 of him. This is sort of a standard thing for the head of each chapter. So for example, I don't know, Samael in the Ravenwing, I know they're not a chapter, but would allow you to re-roll all to hits, and obviously that will affect shooting and close combat. So I see that as his main value because he is quite expensive. Additionally, Drago is the only model who allows you to re-roll all to hits. So a lot of the Grandmasters will allow you to re-roll, but they will only allow you to re-roll ones. So this is your way to get all of the re-rolls. Moving on to Grandmaster Voldus, he is again exactly the same as he is in the index. I'm a little bit disappointed in that because I wanted him to be a bit more of a badass. I suppose he's okay. However, his main value comes in the fact that he knows 3 psychic powers and can manifest 3 in the psychic phase and attempt to deny 3. So he's the most powerful librarian you'll have in this codex. Next up, we move on to the bog standard Grandmaster, and he is again exactly the same as you'll find in the index. Moving on to some of the cool stuff, some of the new stuff, some of the stuff that's going to make this codex better than Grey Knights were in the index. We have the Grandmaster on a Nemesis Dreadknight. Now, Nemesis Dreadknights are by far the most unique and cool thing about a Grey Knight's army, so the fact that you can now take a Grandmaster in one is brilliant, and obviously you get a few extra things for doing so. So his stat line is immediately increased. His weapon skill goes up to 2+ instead of 3+ for a normal Dreadknight, and ballistic skill also goes up to 2+. Other than that, his strength and toughness stay the same, as do his wounds. However, he also gains an additional attack and an additional leadership. Obviously, leadership's only really going to come into play when you are dealing with psychic tests that challenge leadership, because he's only one model, so he's never going to be taking battle shock tests. But from other things I've seen, I believe it's not that much of a points hike going from a normal Nemesis Dreadknight to a Grandmaster Nemesis Dreadknight, and as a result, these few increases in his stat line are very welcome. In addition, his invulnerable save, usually a Nemesis Dreadknight has an invulnerable save of a 5+, the Grandmaster has an invulnerable save of a 4+. Now, if you use a psychic power such as, I believe it's Sanctuary, that gives you +1 to your invulnerable saves, you can have a Nemesis Dreadknight with a 2+ armor save and a 3+ invulnerable save, which is obviously very good. And we'll get over to looking at the relics in a minute, which you could put on a Grandmaster to make them even more effective. On top of that, it just keeps getting better with the Grandmaster. in Dreadknight armor, he can manifest 2 psychic powers and deny 1 instead of only manifesting 1 and denying 1. So he gives you additional psychic abilities on top of that. He is a character, however, as he has above 12 wounds, I believe that means that you can target him without him being the closest model. And he has the standard Grandmaster shenanigans about re-rolling 1s for models within 6 inches. Or for units within 6 inches, sorry. So I think fairly clearly the Grandmaster in Nemesis Dreadknight armor is by far the best choice at first glance. Very, very effective, and if you like running Nemesis Dreadknights, it means you don't need to take up a heavy slot, you can take up an HQ slot, and for a more effective Dreadknight. Now, when we get over to the latter part of the book where we can look at psychic powers, and when we look at the relics, we will see how we can make them even more effective, because I'm sure there are some more things we can do with them. Next up we have Castellan Crow. He is essentially the Purifier version of a HQ choice. Now, Purifiers, in my opinion, I don't know if they're better or worse, but we'll get over to that in a second. His stat line, again, hasn't changed since the index, so exactly the same. Next up we have Brother Captain Stern. Again, pretty much, in fact, he is exactly the same as he is in the index, so no changes. Now, Brother Captain Stern, I've looked at this, and he does give you a few bonuses to the army in terms of Strands of Fate, which allows you to re-roll a single failed hit or wound. However, if you do so, your opponent can re-roll a single failed hit or wound, or saving throw in their next turn. So it's sort of a trade-off. I don't know if that's that effective, but the Psychic Locus thing is. So whenever a friendly Grey Knights unit within 6 inches of any Brother Captains manifests a smite power, double its range. Now, that's really good. I was thinking, because basically, obviously, all of the smite ranges for Grey Knights are reduced. The main thing I was thinking, and unfortunately it's not possible, but I'm sure there's some other ways you can use it to your advantage, is basically the Purifiers, who we'll look at in a minute, the range of their smite is only 3 inches. However, they inflict d6 mortal wounds instead of d3, and you don't need to roll over 10 to get that. So by doubling that range, you get that range up to 6 inches. Now, it would be super effective if you could deep strike and immediately use that. However, even when you deep strike, obviously you'll be 9 inches away, so that won't work. But I'm sure there's some things you can do, and that is quite a useful ability, considering almost everyone in your army, or everyone in your army does pretty much have smite and will be using it every turn. And Brother Captain Stern also has Zone of Banishment, which again is a very, very demon specific style ability. So unfortunately, we never used to see him very, very often in tournament style lists or decent list builds, and I still think you're going to continue not to see him very often, which is obviously a shame. Moving over to your standard Brother Captain, basically a more vanilla version of Brother Captain Stern, and with the same ability, Psychic Locus, which doubles the range of your smite. So if you wanted to go for that, obviously you just take the bog standard Brother Captain instead of Brother Captain Stern. Obviously, if you have a different opinion about this, please write a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Next up, we move to the Librarian. Obviously, in the index, Librarians didn't have their own entry in Grey Knights. It was just an entry from the Space Marine Codex, Space Marine part of the book, sorry. So for the Librarian here, stat line is fairly standard for a Librarian. However, what you do get is, that makes him slightly different to a normal Space Marine one, is he gets a Nemesis warding stave. As he's in Terminator armor, he already has a 5+ invulnerable save. If he gets into close combat, the Nemesis warding stave means that his invulnerable save is upped to a 4+ instead of a 5+. Additionally, your Librarian will know 2 powers from the Sanctic Discipline, which is obviously extended, and we'll have a look at that in a minute, and can attempt to deny 2 powers in the enemy psychic phase. Tech Marine, again, is a fairly standard entry, and there is nothing of note here. Now, this is something new. Grey Knights now have the availability to take chaplains. So there's a few different things coming out and a few different things that already exist which have upped the effectiveness of Grey Knights, and I suppose the chaplain will be one of those things. So as we discussed earlier, you could take Drago to allow you to reroll to hits, both in shooting and in close combat. Obviously that's quite an expensive way of doing things. If you want a slightly cheaper way of doing things, and if you want to gear more towards close combat, which Grey Knights are very effective at, you can take a chaplain. So if you took something like, and we will see this in a minute, an Ancient, which allows you to +1 to your attacks for Grey Knights. Obviously, all your Grey Knights have a Nemesis Force Sword, which is base strength, -3 AP and D3 damage. Now, if you have an Ancient to increase their attacks value by 1, and you have a Chaplain near them, again creating a bubble, which is becoming quite popular as a list building technique in 8th edition, it means that you're going to be re-rolling hits in the fight phase for friendly Grey Knights units. So you've not only got incredibly useful close combat attacks with the -3 AP and D3 damage, but you also have more attacks from an Ancient, and you can re-roll those fairly cheaply by getting a Chaplain. But obviously this means that you're going to be building your army towards close combat, and Grey Knights are very good at both, well, not very good at shooting, but they are more effective than your standard Marines at shooting, as they have Storm Bolters, which are rapid fire 2 instead of bolt guns, which are rapid fire 1. So yeah, there are some ways that you can maybe try and move towards a more assault-based army. The only problem I can see so far, and we'll see if this is resolvable in some way in a little bit, is that Grey Knights, getting them into combat can sometimes be a bit of a struggle. Obviously, you can deep strike pretty much everything in this army. You'll have to have half your army on the board at the start, but obviously if you took dedicated transports and things like that, you could put a dedicated transport on, and then next turn put the unit that you had for that dedicated transport into deep strike. And you'd probably use Razorbacks in that instance. But if you come in from reserve, you're 9 inches away, so trying to get a 9-inch charge is quite difficult, and then after that they are moderately slow, although you do have some faster options. But yeah, we'll talk about those tactics more towards the end of the video. The Brotherhood Champion is pretty much exactly the same. Every army, or most Space Marine armies, seem to have some sort of variant of this, and it's basically just a single model who is a little bit better in close combat. He doesn't really provide any buffs to other models, he's just very good himself. So just an elite unit who, if you want to try and get into combat, would be slightly better. So next up we are on to Terminators. Now Terminators are troops for Grey Knights, as they always have been. That's sort of their little unique thing, and Terminators are slightly better than they were in the last edition. In the last edition they weren't faring so well, however now they're doing slightly better. However, they're, depending on the meta you're playing, still very, very, very points heavy for what you get in terms of your output for damage, but they are quite good at holding things, and they do have Storm Bolters, which have been increased in their effectiveness for doing damage. Other than that though, their stat line is pretty much exactly the same as it was. We'll look at it to see if their points values have changed, and we'll also have a look to see if any psychic powers or relics will help buff them indirectly. Next up we have Strike Squads. Now I will go through a list that I have written, which will be in a battle report in a couple of weeks, more towards the end of the video, but Strike Squads, relatively points efficient, obviously a little bit more expensive, but we'll get over to the exact point cost in a little bit. However, because they have Storm Bolters that are rapid fire 2, it means if you're within rapid fire range, each Marine gets 4 shots instead of 2 shots, so double the firepower of a standard Marine. Additionally, you do get the Nemesis Force Swords, which are obviously make them a lot better in close combat. Other than that, they are pretty much exactly the same as they were, or they are exactly the same as they were. And again, we will talk through some more tactics a little bit towards the end of the video. They can take one special weapon for every 5 models in the unit, in terms of either a Nemesis Psy Cannon or Incinerator, etc. So these guys, we will talk about putting them in a list and the tactics around them, but they are fairly good, and I'm going to try and use them a little bit more. Next up we are on to the Apothecary, and Apothecaries in my head and on paper are absolutely amazing. You get to get wounds back. However, every time I played them, and I have played quite a few games before we started filming them and seeing battle reports, you'll realise that they are not in any battle reports, and the reason is that on paper they are amazing, but in reality they tend to do very, very little. So basically, you can bring models back to life, but it's on a 4+, so nah. And you can give wounds back. Now, if you had a Paladin squad, this would probably, an Apothecary might give you the value and might be worth it. But if you're not running Paladins, I don't think it is worth it. You could argue maybe with Terminators it is. Paladins, it would be worth it because they have 3 wounds instead of 2 wounds as you would with your standard Terminator. And as a result, you're going to get more value each time the Apothecary gives wounds back. And if an Apothecary needs to bring a model back to life, there is far much more value in bringing a 3 wound, very, very expensive model back to life than there is in bringing back, say, a Strike Squad Marine or a Purifier. Other than that though, the Apothecary is exactly the same as he was. There are no real changes there. Now we move on to the Brotherhood Ancient, which, as I was discussing earlier, can, mixed with the Chaplain, give you a little bit more of a boost in close combat. The Brotherhood Ancient has a banner, and any models within 6 of him get to add 1 to their leadership and attacks characteristics. So he's very good. His stat line has not changed, but that's how you would use him. Next up we have Paladins. Now Paladins are, well, they're really cool, but whether they are effective or not is up for discussion, and we'll discuss that now. So Paladins are basically Terminators, more expensive. However, for that extra points cost, you do get an additional wound, and on top of that additional wound, any model may replace their foresword with an item from the melee weapons list, and for every 5 models in the unit, 2 Paladins may replace their Stormbolter with an item from the special weapons list. That is compared to Terminators, which only allows 1 Terminator to replace their Stormbolter with anything from the special weapons list. However, Terminators can also replace any of their melee weapons, as can Paladins. So for the additional points cost, essentially what you're getting is an additional wound and the ability to take more ranged special weapons. Additionally, you do get a Paragon, who is essentially the sergeant of the unit, as it were, and his weapon skill is 2+ instead of 3+, and additionally his leadership goes up to 9, bumping up the leadership of the squads. So there aren't that many changes, but that additional wound is pretty welcome. We'll have to see how the meta goes in terms of the weaponry that is used and the damage output, because you could get 1 wound through, and if it's 3 damage, you've still lost a Terminator or a Paladin. But I think the true way that the Grey Knights are going to change, again I keep saying this and we'll get to it in a minute, is going to be from the relics and from the new psychic powers. I think that's where the new flavour is going to come from. Paladin Ancient is exactly the same as the Brotherhood Ancient in terms of its ability to increase leadership and attacks, and other than that is the same as he is in the Index. Next up we're on to Purifiers. Purifiers again being the same, no real changes there. Now Purifiers used to have, back in the day, they all had 2 attacks. That's where they got their additional value from. They had more attacks in close combat. However, now their base is 1. The Sergeant of the Squad, Knight of the Flame, has 2 attacks. The main way that they are different, however, is Purifying Flame. So when they get into close combat, their smite power is just different. They don't have to be in close combat, but their smite power has a range of 3 inches, so way less than the 18 inches, I believe, standard smite. However, always inflicts D6 mortal wounds instead of D3, whether or not you roll over 10, which is obviously very effective. These guys are very, very geared up towards close combat, and I believe that the reason that they are is you have to be super close for Purifying Flame. They are supposed to be a close combat style unit, and that was represented previously with their additional attacks, but now I believe it's done so with that Purifying Flame ability. They used to have an ability called Cleansing Flame. But other than that, they're very, very similar. The main difference is the Purifying Flame. Oh, and additionally, for every 5 models, 2 Purifiers can replace their weapons with special weapons, as opposed to just 1 as you would get in a normal strike squad. Moving on to the Dreadnought variations. So the difference that you get from a Grey Knight Dreadnought and a normal Space Marine Dreadnought is that the Grey Knight Dreadnoughts are still Psychers, so they still get to not only cast Smite, but they know 1 power from the Sanctic Discipline as well, which is cool. Unfortunately, as Grey Knights, you do not get access to the new Dreadnought. I believe it's called, is it a Redemption or Redemptor Dreadknight? I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure you guys will correct me, and thank you for that. But yeah, you don't get access to that, and that model and the rules around that model are very good. You have a lot of firepower from that unit, so you're still using the old style variants of Dreadnoughts. Now, I watched the Winters SEO review, because Winters is a legend, about a week ago, and he pointed out something that I did not know. So back in the day, there was, in 5th edition, when I used to play the army, there were variants of dreadnoughts whereby they were called Cypherman Dreadnoughts, and basically you took 2 twin-linked autocannons and you took something called Cybolt ammunition, which was an upgrade that increased the strength of the autocannons by 1, taking them to strength 8. Apparently you can't do that with the dreadnoughts in the book, but from Forge World you can still have Rifleman Dreadnoughts, which is a dreadnought with 2 twin-linked autocannons, but you don't have the ability to increase their strength by 1 anymore. Cybolt ammo does not exist. However, I believe there is a stratagem which we'll get to in a minute. So you have your standard dreadnought, venerable dreadnought, and their options. Servitors, as like standard, same sort of thing you're used to seeing. More unique Grey Knight squads, we have interceptor squads. Interceptor squads are a sort of faster variant, as it were. Basically, at one point during the game, they can, if they're already on the board, teleport shunt, which essentially means they just deep strike elsewhere on the board using all the normal rules you'd use, just 9 inches away from any model. So they're very good at shifting stuff around the board. I've looked into using them, and at present I don't think I will, but I can see where their value lies, and that lies in shifting around the board. In an army that is effectively very, very manoeuvrable for a turn, in the fact that you can keep half off the board and deep strike it any way you want, but then after that very slow in moving positions. This is an answer to getting stuff around, so it would probably be very effective if you had Maelstrom missions and you played a lot of those. However, if you were smart with placing objectives in places and you had a bit of a backline, as well as something pushing forward to sort of throw down the enemy's throats, you could probably get away with not using interceptors, because you could get the value you would get out of them just by altering your play style. So it's a bit of extra points for essentially what is a strike squad with some extra manoeuvrability. Next up, we're on to the Purgation squad, which is essentially the Grey Knight equivalent of a heavy weapons squad, in that any model may replace their force sword with an item from the melee weapons list, that's fine, and up to 4 Purgators in the unit may replace their Stormbolter and sword with an item from the special weapons list, meaning you can have a squad of 5 with 4 Psy Cannons, which is probably what you would do. Now, again, when I first saw this, I thought, oh, there's some things you could do with incinerators maybe, and you drop them down and then you just burn a whole unit. However, the range of an incinerator is, unfortunately, I think it's 8 inches, and obviously you have to deep strike 9 inches away, so that poo-pooed that idea. But having a squad of 4 Psy Cannons that can sit at the back on objectives, so you place an objective in a building, just be smart with where you place them, get a Purgation squad, put them on that, so that they are ideally in cover, getting a 2+ because of the cover, taking a 3+ to 2+, and not moving. You would be rolling to hit on 3s instead of 4s for heavy weapons for moving. So they can pump out a decent amount of shots. That's one squad. If you had all Psy Cannons pumping out 16 shots a turn, strength 7 minus 2 damage, I think. That's off the top of my head, probably wrong, we'll look at that in a minute. But yeah, Purgation squads I think are quite interesting, and I'm very tempted to use them. I keep putting them into my list and taking them out and figuring out what the most effective way of putting in additional firepower is, and whether they're the best way to do that. And we finally reached the Nemesis Dreadknight, which is the coolest thing, even though it looks like a baby carrier, apparently, I don't know. So it's the standard variant, which is exactly the same as it was in the index, so no changes there if you're familiar with that, and we've already discussed it. The main difference is the fact that you have access to heavy incinerators and heavy Psy Cannons. Heavy incinerator has a longer range of 12 inches, so it means you can deep strike in and then immediately use it, which is brilliant. Heavy D6, strength 6, minus 1 AP, 2 damage, and then the heavy Psy Cannon is heavy 6, strength 7, minus 1 AP, 2 damage. So basically, they don't have any ability that allows them to use their standard ballistic skill when they move, so you're probably going to be moving your Dreadknights every turn, realistically, because they have an 8-inch movement, slightly better than everything else. And you want to try and get them into positions where they can shoot and then charge into combat as well. So I see you hitting on 4s with the side cannons a lot, which makes me think, are they worth it? Gatling Silencer does give you more shots, but is only strength 4, minus no AP value and D3 damage, so it's sort of a weighing up which one is better. I would probably go for the side cannon over the Gatling Silencer. I did have a watch a Tabletop Tactics battle report, as you do, and Lawrence was saying that on his Grandmaster variants he would be taking the Gatling Silencer because of re-rolling 1s it might be slightly more effective, and also because the Grandmaster has an additional ballistic skill. However, I'm not convinced, and I would probably still go with the heavy side cannon variant most of the time. The main thing that's really cool about Dreadknights as well is for 10 points you get a Nemesis, you get a Dreadknight teleporter, which basically means they can deep strike, so for 10 points you can allow them to shift in. You used to have a teleport shunt available to the Nemesis Dreadknight, which allowed them to move 30 inches, I believe it was, once a game. However, that is no longer available to them, unfortunately. Next up we have Land Raiders, which are sort of standard. This Land Raider is not a Psyker. Land Raider Crusader, again, standard stuff. Land Raider Redeemer, standard stuff, we're familiar with all this. Razorbacks. So Razorbacks are quite a good option. They're in a list that I have built and will walk through in a minute, but they're a good way to get some longer ranged firepower, I suppose, in addition to maybe some dreadnoughts, some rifleman dreadnoughts and rhinos. So they're a good way to get things around the board. I'm yet to put it into practice, so aren't really sure what to recommend in terms of the use of rhinos and razorbacks. If you have an opinion, please put it in the comments below. It may affect the list I take in a few weeks in the next battle report. New stuff for the Grey Knights, woohoo! So, Stormhawk Interceptors. Grey Knights now have access to this. It's the same as it is in the Space Marine Index and Codex, essentially, but it's more of an anti-flyer, as it were. Now, flyers have recently been nerfed somewhat in that if you only have flyers on the board at the end of your turn, you are essentially immediately wiped off and lose the game, and flyers can no longer secure objectives. When they could secure objectives, I would highly have recommended taking one of these or the other flyer option that is now available to them. But as they are not, it's now a case of weighing up where you'll get your firepower from. However, it's very nice to know that Grey Knights now have slightly cheaper options, as it were, because previously they only had access to the gunship, whereas now having this Stormhawk Interceptor and the other flyer means that they have cheaper options for flyers. From first glance as well, my preference does seem to go towards the Stormhawk Interceptors. The fact that they have 2 assault cannons, which means 12 heavy shots, strength 6, AP 1 damage, and 2 heavy bolters as well, which is 6 shots, strength 5, minus 1 AP, D1. You can also swap things out for things like a Las Talon if you need a bit more high damage output things for taking out vehicles or big monsters. But the main thing that makes me think they're pretty cool is the fact that they have Infernum Halo launchers, which means you can re-roll save rolls of 1 for them, which makes them a bit more resilient. Next up we have the Storm Raven gunship. Some of you might be aware, some of you might not, but there were a few lists that did very, very well not that long ago, which was essentially something silly like 5 Storm Raven gunships and then a few things on the floor. Storm Raven gunships obviously being quite powerful, 14 wounds in the air with a 3+ save, toughness 7, means that they're quite difficult to kill, and they can pump out a load of firepower. Hurricane bolters are very, very effective, with 2 sets of Hurricane bolters, which are relatively cheap, and a little addition you can take on this Storm Raven. You get to pump out 24 shots if you're in close firing range, which you would easily be able to do with a Storm Raven. Get them in their face first turn, so that's a lot of shots. And then you also have access to high damage output stuff, such as twin-link las cannons, twin-link melter guns, and their, what missiles are they called? Storm Strike missile launchers. So you have access to a lot of stuff, and additionally with Power of the Machine Spirit in the air, it means that you're never suffering the penalty for heavy weapons for moving. So they're a brilliant option, and obviously you can use them as transports to move quite a few models around the board. So it can move 12 Grey Knight infantry models and 1 Grey Knight Dreadnought. Terminators take up the space of 2, so you could put 6 Terminators in there for maybe 1 character and a squad of 5. So they're a very effective way of moving things around the board. Next up we have Storm Talon, which is the same as you normally find. It's not a psycho or anything like that, and another new addition to the Grey Knights. Now this is the stuff that's going to make a real difference. So we've been through all the unit entries, we know what's new there, we know that there's essentially not that much of a change from the index for most things, although they do have a few cool new options. But the things that are going to change the way that your army is going to play are going to be these things. And obviously codexes are giving additional benefits in terms of if you just use a certain keyword such as Grey Knights, then you have additional benefits, you have additional Warlord traits, and you have relics. So that is what we're going to look at now, and this is going to be the coolest part of the codex, I think. So Brotherhood of Psykers. If your army is battle forged, all Psykers in Grey Knight's detachments gain this ability. You can add 1 to psychic tests and deny the witch tests taken for such a unit. That's obviously brilliant. So, and it's interesting the way this is worded. So, if your army is battle forged, which is fairly achievable and everyone's usually is, all Psykers in Grey Knight's detachments gain this ability. So it means you could have a battalion detachment with Grey Knights, and then if you wanted to ally in, say, a Airwing detachment with flyers from a different chapter or something like that, you could do that and you'll still gain the benefit of Brotherhood of Psykers. It does mean that obviously everyone is casting, everyone in your army is essentially a Psyker, except for the flyers. It does mean that you will be casting Smite on a 4 instead of a 5, which is brilliant, and as you have access to more psychic powers, which we'll check out in a minute, that is really, really good, and it gives you more psychic resiliency and defense in terms of 1 to deny the witch tests. Now, Knights of Titan, what's this? If your army is Battleforged, all troops gain, in Grey Knight detachments, gain this ability. It's basically, so it's essentially objective secured. Everyone's getting access to this, and there's a recent FAQ that opened it up to pretty much every army. So obscured for your troops, which obviously could be Terminators if you wanted them to be, and it would be quite cool to have Terminators holding an objective because they're supposed to be really resilient at holding stuff. Next up we move on to the Warlord traits. So let's have a look at this. This is where it gets interesting. If Grey Knight's character is your Warlord, he can generate a Warlord trait from the following table instead of the one in the Warhammer 40,000 rulebook. You can either roll on the table or select it essentially. So the Warlord traits, we have Demon Slayer. If your Warlord wounds a demon in the fight phase, your opponent must subtract 1 from any invulnerable saving throws made against the attack. That's obviously just affecting your Warlords, however is quite cool, but very situational. It depends, I suppose, when you choose your Warlord trait. If you are going to a tournament and you have to choose it ahead of time, then you probably wouldn't want to do that because it wouldn't be effective a majority of the time. But if you chose it just before you were playing a game and you were against demons, then obviously that would be a little bit more useful. I'd say that Demon Slayer probably isn't going to be used that much because it's so situational in just being against demons, but obviously if you are against them, bonus. Next up, Hammer of Righteousness. You can add 1 to wound rolls for your Warlord in the fight phase if he successfully charged this turn. I'd say that that's a better choice because it's going to be effective more of the time, and also adding 1 to wound rolls is quite useful. You're probably going to be re-rolling 1s, so that just means that you're going to get more of your things through. Unyielding Anvil. Friendly Grey Knights units within 6 inches of your Warlord automatically pass morale tests, so that's a bit of a buff to things around them. Fairly standard, but kind of cool. First to the fray. You can re-roll failed charge rolls for your Warlord and friendly Grey Knight units that are within 6 of him at the start of the charge phase. That's the one. So, as I was saying earlier, that's basically it. Without checking the other two so far. if you gear your army towards close combat, i.e. you were taking a chaplain and you were taking an ancient to increase your attacks values and make sure you're re-rolling, if you took this first to the fray, deep strike a load of stuff in within 9 inches, you've got re-rolls on your charges, which greatly increases the chance of you getting a few things in. That to me is going to be almost a must depending on the way you build your army and what your intention is with it, but that is extremely cool. And also, if you put that on, if your Warlord, for example, was a Nemesis Dreadknight, the bubble is effectively going to be a lot larger because the Nemesis Dreadknight base is a lot larger. So one to certainly think of and probably put into use a lot. Next up, Nemesis Lord. You can add 1 to the damage characteristic of your Warlord's melee weapons. If your Warlord wields a Relic of Titan that is a melee weapon, choose another Warlord trait or reroll this result. Another thing only affecting the Warlord. It's interesting, these ones here are all close combat based, including First of the Fray. However, First of the Fray is winning out of all these 4 so far for me, just because it affects not only your Warlord but other units. So overall, First of the Fray is still winning. And Lawmaster, your Warlord knows 1 additional psychic power from the Sanctic Discipline. I don't think you're going to use that much either, because essentially everything in your army is a psyker and you're going to have enough choice, so you're not stuffed for any sort of choice. So I think out of that list, the clear winner is number 4, First of the Fray, and I imagine you'll choose that 90% of the time. I definitely will be. Expect to see that in a battle rep in a couple of weeks. However, some characters you don't have a choice. So Lord Kaldor Drago, Demon Slayer is the first one we discussed, which is a fluff choice, obviously. Grandmaster Voldus, Lawmaster, makes complete sense because he is a psychic heavy unit. Castellan Crow, Hammer of Righteousness, and Brother Captain Stern, Unyielding Anvil. So they all make sense fluff wise, but obviously if you want to create your own, as it were, it's better to go for a standard Grandmaster, and I think you'll probably get a little bit more out of that. Out of all these, the only one I'm really tempted to possibly take is Drago, and the reason I would possibly take Drago is because of his rerolls to hit in close combat and shooting. Moving over to Stratagems, another really cool new addition, and this is what's going to give you more flavour. We're going to look through all of these and see what is effective, what isn't effective. So, starting out, tactical flexibility. Use this stratagem at the start of any of your movement phases. Select a Grey Knight unit within the combat squads with... Let's start again, shall we? Use this stratagem at the start of any of your movement phases. Select a friendly Grey Knight unit with a combat squad's ability that has 10 models. That unit is immediately split into 2 separate units, each containing 5 models. So it's 1 command point and essentially allows you to split a unit in game. Where's the value in that? Well, the value in that is that you have less drops. So when you're putting units down for deployment, if you are 1 drop away and you wanted to combat squad, you could, 1 drop away from getting first turn, you could use that stratagem to do it later and therefore guarantee yourself first turn. Obviously there is an FAQ, however, and new rules coming out around who gets first turn, which would affect that differently. However, it still gives you a bonus, so that's where that would potentially come in use. Additionally, it could come in use whereby you had 2 objectives nearby, different directions, 1 squad of 10 guys, and you could split them to send them off into different ways to get different objectives. And additionally, if you wanted to deep strike half of your army, but you wanted to make sure that you could get as much stuff deep striking as possible, but you wanted to combat squad later, you would use tactical flexibility. So that's a very, very cool stratagem. Next up, Wisdom of the Ancients. Use this stratagem at the start of any phase. Select a friendly Grey Knight's Dreadnought. Until the end of the phase, you can reroll hit rolls for 1 for friendly Grey Knights units within 6s of that Dreadnought. It's 1 command point. Obviously, it relies on using Dreadnoughts and essentially gives you the same benefits you get from a Grandmaster. So, yeah, very going to be very specific when you use that one. Next up, True Silver Armour. 1 command point. Use this stratagem when a Grey Knight's vehicle suffers a mortal wound. Roll a d6. for that mortal wound, and each other mortal wound on a 5+, it's ignored. So it essentially gives you a 5+ feel no pain. Additionally, you don't have to use it until the wound has happened, so it's nice you're not wasting anything without knowing you're going to potentially get value out of it. Additionally, I just want to note that I believe Dreadknights are classified as vehicles. So if we just double check that, yep, Nemesis Dreadknights classified as vehicles, so you could use that on Nemesis Dreadknight. Interesting. Teleportarium. 1 command point. Use this stratagem during deployment. You can set up a friendly Grey Knight's infantry or dreadnought in a teleportarium chamber instead of placing it on the battlefield. At the end of any of your movement phases, this unit can teleport into the battle. That's interesting. So I'm not sure why you'd use that. Most things have access to deep strike anyway. I guess the dreadnoughts don't, and I can't think what infantry doesn't, but it's just a way to get more stuff in. That's fair enough. Next up, only in death does duty end. Use this stratagem when a Grey Knight's character is slain. Before removing it from the battlefield, that model can immediately either shoot as if it were his shooting phase or fight as if it were his fight phase. So useful if you're in combat and you need to take something down. Again, very situational, but it's only 1 command point. Next up, mental focus. Use this stratagem in your psychic phase. 1 Grey Knight Psyker can attempt to cast 1 additional psychic power this phase. I imagine you're going to have enough, to be perfectly honest, but I suppose if you're stuck, you could use that. But again, very specific. Honour the chapter. Use the stratagem at the end of any fight phase. Select a Grey Knight's infantry unit. That unit can immediately fight for a second time. That's really good, but obviously it's 3 command points there. So if, as we discussed before, you were gearing towards a very close combat heavy army and you had your ancient and you had your chaplain and used that, you could potentially wipe out a lot of stuff. If you managed to as well tie up 2 units maybe, so you multi-charged and got them in, and it was quite a large squad of, let's say, paladins or something like that, maybe purifiers, and you used that ability, you could probably chew through things quite quickly. So that's very good, but obviously expensive, but it probably needs to be. Next up, teleportation boost. 1 command point. Use this stratagem in your movement phase. If you make a teleport shunt with an interceptor squad that has already made a teleport shunt earlier in the battle, sorry. So you can basically re-teleport again with interceptors. Obviously only effective if you use interceptors. Orbital bombardment. I think it's the same as Space Marines. Essentially you use an orbital bombardment. It's 3 command points. So visible point on the battlefield and roll d6 for every enemy unit within d6 of that point. Subtract 1 from the result of the unit being rolled is for a character. On a 4+, the unit being rolled for suffers d3 mortal wounds. So just a way to do a little bit of extra damage. Psychic channeling, I think this is one of the really, really good ones, and for 1 command point, yeah, it is. So obviously the Grey Knight's power comes in the fact that they're very psychic heavy. So this is going to be brilliant. Use this stratagem when taking a psychic test for a Grey Knight's Psyker. Roll 3 dice rather than 2 and pick the 2 highest results. That, combined with Brotherhood of Psykers, means you're very likely to get what you want off. And you could then, there's nothing to say you can't then use another dice, so you can't use your command point to re-roll if you failed. This is going to come into effect with something called Vortex of Doom, which we're going to look at in a minute. Next up, Psychic Onslaught. This stratagem, before a Grey Knight's unit shoots, the strength and armour penetration characteristics of any Gatling silencers, heavy psi cannons, silencers and psi cannons is improved by 1. So AP goes to an additional -1 and the strength goes up by 1. So it's good, but it's more geared towards their heavier special weapons, and it's 2 command points to represent that. That would be very, very good with a Purgation squad, obviously because you'll get the most value out of it. So that's probably the best place to use that ability to get the most value. The Aegis, this used to be an ability, but obviously it's probably slightly different. 2 command points. Use this stratagem after an enemy Psyker has manifested a psychic power within 24 inches of a Grey Knight Psyker or vehicle. Your unit can immediately attempt to deny the witch, and when taking the test, roll 3 dice rather than 2 and pick the 2 highest rolls. It's essentially the defensive equivalent of psychic channeling, but it's slightly more effective. However, if you're against someone who really, really wanted to get a power off, because it was going to make a massive game-changing ability. I don't know, let's say Magnus with potentially using warp time, because why would anyone do that? You could use that, and you're obviously getting +1 to Deny the Witch anyway, so yeah, you can shut someone down when you need to shut them down, but quite situational. Cybolt ammo. Cybolt ammo used to be an upgrade you bought, however now is a stratagem. It's in 5th edition. 2 command points. Use the stratagem before Grey Knight's unit shoots. The strength and armor penetration values of bolt guns increase. So one unit of 10 stroke squad marines is pumping out 40 shots if they're in close combat range. If you can up that to strength 5 minus 1 AP, that's really good. But it's obviously 2 command points, so you're paying for it. But I mean, if it was 1 command point, I think that'd be silly. You'd use it all the time. Next up, heed the long word. Use the stratagem at the start of your turn. Pick a Grey Knight's character and add 1 to its invulnerable saving throws until the start of your next turn. Didn't we not? I think there's a psychic. No, there wasn't a psychic power, was there? No, it's a stratagem. So you can increase your invulnerable save on your Nemesis Dreadknight to Grandmaster 1 to a 3+. That's how you do it. It wasn't through a psychic power, as I said earlier in the video. Armory of Titan, 1 command point stroke 3. Use this stratagem before the battle. Your army can have 1 extra Relic of Titan for 1 command point or 2 extra relics for 3. So we'll look at the relics in a minute, see if that's good. And 2 command points for Finest Hour. Use this stratagem at the start of your turn. Pick a Grey Knight's character and double the range of any aura abilities on its data sheet. Now, you could probably avoid using that if you play well, I suppose. So probably not going to be seen that often, but I suppose if you've cocked up your movement, that's a way to get back off it. Okay, more interesting stuff, Relics of Titan. Now, this is going to be where we see some more cool stuff. So if you've picked a non-named character, you're going to be able to add a Relic of Titan. So if your army is led by Grey Knight's Warlord, then before the battle you may give one of them the following Relics of Titan. Named characters such as Drago already have 1 and cannot be giving any of the following relics. I believe these are free, I'll double check that, but I believe they're free, you don't have to pay for them. So Fury of Demios is a ranged weapon, 30 inches, rapid fire 3, strength 5 minus AP 1, damage 1, so just a little bit extra on that. I suppose if you were taking a standard Grand Master, you could take that. Destroyer of Another Word, model with Nemesis Demon Hammer only. The Destroyer of replace the bearer's Nemesis Demon Hammer and has the following profile. So it's just a slightly better hammer, essentially. Banner of Refining Flame. Banners are usually fun. Let's have a look. Paladin Ancient or Brotherhood Ancient only. The Banner of the Refining Flame is a sacred banner. A model equipped with this banner loses the Rites of Banishment ability. That's cool. So Rites of Banishment is the ability which nerfs your smite. Instead, when the bearer manifests a smite psychic power, it only has a range of 6 inches, but inflicts D6 mortal wounds instead of D3, whether or not the result of the test is more than 10. That's obviously really, really good. And you could put that on your deep striking Nemesis Dreadknight Grandmaster. Obviously you wouldn't be able to use it when he drops in because the range is 6 and you have to be 9 inches away, but you're going to be in the enemy line, so after that you'll be able to use it, and dealing constant D6 wounds is very, very effective. With his 8-inch move, I reckon that's the best place to put that, and currently that looks like the option I will be taking on my Nemesis Dreadknight Grandmaster variant. So Soulglaive, Nemesis Halberd replacing only. It's potentially just going to be a slightly better version. This one, all enemy demon units must subtract 1 from their leadership characteristics when they are within 6 of the bearer. Very specific again, so you'd have to know what you're going up against, and also I suppose that's only going to come into play when you're doing Battleshock tests, really, and maybe some psychic shenanigans with some leadership based stuff. Curious of Sacrifice, infantry models only. Roll a d6 each time the bearer loses a wound on a 5+ damage ignored, and the bearer does not lose a wound, so it's essentially a 5+ feel no pain. Out of all of these, the one I am most tempted to take is the Banner of Refining Flame, because mortal wounds are extremely effective, and with psychic powers you don't need to hit, so you can put that up against say a land raider or something, and you're sorted. You're going to do well with that. So the psychic powers, Purge Soul, and now everyone gets to, so the psychic powers, now everyone gets access to these, pretty much everyone in your army, and they get to pick one of these in addition to Smite. So everyone is a psyker, and you're probably going to pick one for a certain unit type and just repeat it, but we're going to have a look at what we have available to us. So Purge Soul, warp charge value of 5, obviously if you're all Grey Knights it goes down to 4. If manifested, pick a visible enemy unit within 12 inches of the psyker, so you can pick, you don't have to pick the closest as you would with Smite. Both controlling players roll a dice and add their respective unit's highest leadership value. If the target's total is equal to or greater than the psyker's total, nothing happens. If the psyker's total is greater, target unit suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to the difference. So on the previous page, I believe it was, this here, all demons must subtract 1 to their leadership within 6 inches. If that wasn't demons, if that was anything, that would be a really nice combo, but because it's demons, it becomes a lot more specific. But it's still quite good. The leadership values of your squads is going to be 8 or 9 if you still have your equivalent of a sergeant alive. Therefore, that could be quite an interesting way if you're dealing with low leadership things to start taking people out. Gate of Infinity, warp charge value of 6, down to 5 if you have all Grey Knights. If manifested, pick a friendly Grey Knights units within 12 inches of the psyker, remove that unit from the battlefield and immediately set up anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches away from an enemy model. So, obviously you can only cast this once if you're playing match play, but earlier we were having a discussion about interceptors, which have their jump packs and you have to pay for that additional ability. Well, if you just give a strike squad Gate of Infinity, if you need to, you can shift something to the other side of the board. Additionally, as it's only going off on a 5 chance, so you probably will get it, your average on 2 dice is 7. So you could, obviously the issue you're going to have with Grey Knights is you want to deep strike a lot of stuff because their maneuverability is their semi-weakness-ish. So half your army's coming in by deep strike, but you want more to come in by deep strike. This gives you 1 more unit that could potentially get into the enemy lines on turn 1. And also, if you are playing Maelstrom, there's something on the other side of the board you desperately need to get back to. Gate of Infinity is going to be brilliant. Also, if you have a really tough unit, such as Terminators and Paladins, and you want to shift them around the board quickly because they need to be where it counts, Gate of Infinity is brilliant. This is a fantastic power. And I recommend taking it on quite a lot of stuff. We're going to have to weigh up what else we have available to us. Hammer Hand, warp charge value of 6. If manifested, pick a friendly Grey Knights unit within 12 of the psyker. Add 120 rune rolls you make for that unit's melee weapons until the start of your next psychic phase. Another way of stacking. So we have a lot of options to stack to increase effectiveness in close combat. So what this is leading me down the path of thinking is you want a large squad of something that's very effective in combat, such as, I dare say, Paladins, but obviously they're very expensive, or maybe just even a large squad of Purifiers or something like that. Get that large squad, you have your Chaplain and your Ancient, which are going to give you an additional attack and rerolls. You take your Warlord trait, which allows you to reroll charge distances, and you can also take, wasn't there a stratagem we were talking about a minute ago which allowed you to do something, I can't remember. You take that and you take Hammer Hand, you're becoming a beast in close combat, like really effective. So there's a lot of things that stack quite nicely and will greatly increase your effectiveness in close combat, Hammer Hand being one. Sanctuary effectively gives you a 5+ invulnerable save. If you already have one, you add 1. So earlier when I was saying that you could increase your invulnerable save by 1 through psychic powers, you can, Sanctuary, and I believe if we also look at the, which one was it here, there was one here that allowed you to increase your invulnerable save of 1. Here we go. So if you use that command point and those command points and Sanctuary, you could get a 2+ invulnerable save on something for a turn. So if something was, you really wanted to keep it alive, a 2+ invulnerable save is nothing to be sniffed at, especially if it's something like a Nemesis Dreadknight. So yeah, that's a nice little combo you can use. Astral Aim effectively allows you to shoot through walls, I believe. target units that are not visible to them. So specific, probably not going to take it very often, because it's so specific and some of these other things are going to be useful a lot of the time. That's probably one I wouldn't pick as frequently. You might want to put it in a squad somewhere so that you have access to it. Vortex of Doom, this is the one that is really powerful. It was in the Tabletop Tactics battle report and did a lot of damage. It was quite cool. So charge value of 8, which goes down to 7 if you have all Grey Knights in that detachment. If manifested, a vortex opens above the nearest visible enemy model within 12 inches of the psyker. So you can't pick where it goes, fine. So your opponent can be clever with their positioning. That model's unit and every other unit within 3 inches of that model suffers D3 mortal wounds. So it's from the model, not the unit. If, however, you picked a model with a really large base, such as, I don't know, there's no specification as to what it was. If you had an Imperial Knight on the board or you had a Land Raider or something that has a large footprint, your bubble of what that is going to affect is going to be greater. So keep that in mind. And then you affect D3 mortal wounds to all those units as well. And it goes up to D6 if the result of the test is 12 or more. Obviously, it can be more than 12 because on a roll of double 6 it becomes 13 thanks to the Brotherhood of Psychers special rule. So you have access to some really cool stuff here. And this, the relics, the stratagems, and the psychic abilities are where you've gotten your buff. And now we're over to points values. So I'm not going to cover what's changed actually. I don't think you can have a look here if you really want to. It's right in front of you. But yeah, and I think I've pretty much discussed the, and you also have some tactical objectives here as well, which is kind of cool. I've pretty much discussed throughout as we've gone through different tactics you can use. I am going to wrap it up there because the video has been quite long already, and I think we've been talking about tactics as we've been going along as well. There is a battle report coming in, I think it's 2 weeks it'll be released, between a Tzeentch Demons list and Grey Knights, and the Tzeentch Demons list is proper filth, like really, really tournament worthy. So that'll be a very cool bat rep to watch. Make sure you press subscribe so that you're going to see that, and make sure you watch some of our other battle reports. We've improved the format and it is dramatically better. Additionally, I want to give a shout out to Wargames, who we are sponsored by. Please check them out. And also I want to give a shout out to the XLC, who do some Visicast products. If you want to check them out, they're also linked below. I just want to say thanks for watching, guys. Please make sure you check out some other videos, and I'll see you soon in that battle report with Grey Knights.